Welcome to today's Explainer. We are unpacking one of the absolutely most thrilling, nerve-wracking journeys in human history. Picture this. The date is July 20th, 1969. Humanity is right on the edge of achieving something that, for literally millennia, was considered pure magic. We're talking, of course, about the Apollo 11 mission, that incredibly perilous journey that finally put humans on the moon. Okay, let's dive into this. 600 million. That is a massive number, right? Well, at that exact moment in 1969, over 600 million people across the globe were sitting completely glued to their television screens. I mean, people literally stopped whatever they were doing. They were holding their breath, just staring at these grainy black and white broadcasts, watching this tiny, fragile spacecraft prepare to descend onto a totally alien surface. But what we often forget today, looking back through the comfortable lens of knowing it was a success, is the genuinely terrifying reality of that moment. There was this really dark question hanging over the entire world. What if they never came home? You see, if this landing failed, there was absolutely no backup plan. There was no rescue ship waiting in the wings to swoop in and save them. The astronauts would be stranded in space forever. It was a mission with literal life or death stakes. And to truly understand the immense pressure of this moment, we really have to look at how we even got there. To grasp that pressure, we kind of have to rewind back to the 1950s. This era kicked off the space race, which was this incredibly intense technological and ideological competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. And early on, well, America was actually losing. In 1957, the Soviet Union totally shocked the world by launching Sputnik 1, the very first artificial satellite. Complete panic set in, which led the US to officially create NASA in 1958, with one main goal: beat the Soviets in space. But then, by 1961, the Soviets struck again, successfully putting the first human, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit. The pressure on the United States was at an absolute boiling point, and that is exactly when President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress in May of 1961 and made this astonishing promise: America would send a man to the moon before the decade was out. Honestly, at the time, that sounded completely impossible. So to actually achieve Kennedy's impossible promise, engineers had to design a machine with unimaginably complex propulsion and life support systems. They built the Saturn V rocket. And to really wrap your head around the sheer engineering marvel we're talking about here, imagine a machine weighing a staggering 3,000 tons. It is, to this day, still one of the most powerful machines ever constructed by human hands. Standing 110 meters tall, the Saturn V was essentially the equivalent of a 36-story building. For the crews strapped into the incredibly cramped command module at the very top, on July 16, 1969, the sensory experience was just violently intense. When those engines ignited, they released enough energy to literally shake the Earth for miles around. The crew endured bone-rattling G-forces as they were hurled through the sky, tearing through the atmosphere to send Apollo 11 hurtling toward the moon. Strapped securely inside that roaring beast were three truly exceptional men, each with highly specialized roles. You had Neil Armstrong, the mission commander. He was renowned for being an incredibly calm and highly skilled pilot, which is exactly who you want in a crisis. Then there was Buzz Aldrin, an absolute engineering genius, slated to be the second man to walk on the moon. And finally, Michael Collins, whose crucial role was to orbit the moon completely solo while the others descended. For a 4-day journey through the dark void of space, these three navigated and constantly checked their systems. They knew perfectly well that even one tiny mistake would instantly end the entire mission. Now, what's really interesting about this part of the story is how it captures the sheer panic of July 20th. Inside the cramped lunar module, which they named the Eagle, Armstrong and Aldrin were hyper-focused, descending toward the moon, when suddenly unexpected computer alarms started blaring loudly inside their tiny cabin. The spacecraft's guidance computer was actually becoming overloaded with data. Just imagine falling toward the surface of the moon, hundreds of thousands of miles from home, and your warning systems are just screaming at you. And if that wasn't terrifying enough, the situation actually got worse. As Armstrong took manual control to steer the module away from a really dangerous boulder-filled crater, the fuel gauge started rapidly dropping. They had only seconds of fuel remaining before the descent engine would simply cut out, which would cause them to crash right into the surface. Down in Houston, mission control was basically paralyzed with anxiety. The mission status had escalated to a massive risk of failure. They were quite literally counting down the seconds of fuel left. And then, just silence, followed by the calm, steady voice of Neil Armstrong crackling over the radio. The Eagle has landed. The tension just instantly evaporated. Mission Control erupted into cheers, and that massive global audience of 600 million people erupted into a worldwide celebration. Against all conceivable odds, they were safely on the ground. But I want us to pivot sharply here for a second, because there is a really profound contrast to that global party. While all of humanity celebrated, Michael Collins was experiencing something completely different. As he orbited the moon alone in the command module, his path took him behind the far side of the moon. And every single time he did this, he lost all radio contact with Earth and with his crewmates. He experienced complete, absolute isolation in the dark. He was the single most isolated human being in the universe, floating in total silence while the rest of his species cheered below. Just a few hours later, the defining moment of the 20th century took place. Armstrong carefully climbed down the ladder of the Eagle in his bulky, pressurized suit. As his boot pressed into the fine, gray lunar dust, he spoke the words that will be remembered as long as humanity exists. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. History wasn't just made in that moment, it was permanently rewritten. So the crucial point is what they actually accomplished while they were out there. They didn't just take a quick stroll and leave. During their 2.5 hours on the surface, they conducted vital scientific experiments. They painstakingly collected lunar rock and dust samples to bring back to scientists on Earth. And, of course, they planted the American flag. By doing all of this, they laid the absolute foundation for all the modern space and Mars exploration we see today. But we've got to remember, the danger wasn't over just because they planted a flag. They still had to survive the trip home. First, they had to execute a wildly risky takeoff from the moon using a single ascent engine, and if it failed, they'd be trapped. Next, they had to perfectly dock with Michael Collins in orbit. Then, they had to navigate the vast journey back to Earth, which culminated in a fiery re-entry through the atmosphere. Thankfully, all the steps went flawlessly, leading to a safe splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The mission was a resounding success. America had definitively won the space race. The legacy of the Apollo 11 mission is just so much bigger than a geopolitical race. It proved to every single person on Earth that humanity can make the impossible possible. The modern rover missions to Mars, our advanced satellite networks, our plans to return to the moon, they are all standing on the shoulders of the Apollo program. So, as we wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with a question to think about. If we could go from launching our very first satellite to walking on the moon in just 12 short years, what impossible leap will humanity take next? Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you next time.